You're listening to the Canadian Women of the Outdoors podcast, the first podcast by Canadian women for Canadian women about Canadian women. Brought to you by Revolution Armory. Join the revolution. And True North Baits, superiority quality fishing tackle. See what the fuss is about. For 10% off all plastics, use code CWO10. Enjoy the episode.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Canadian Women of the Outdoors. We have actually officially hit the year mark. Stupid fly. We've hit the year mark. We are a year into this. It's episode 31. This may end up being a two-part episode because the young lady we have on has lots of fun stories and I'm quite excited to have her on. Before we get into it, big shout out to our sponsors, Revolution Armory and True North Baits. Use code CWO10 for 10% off all their plastics. And we have a new sponsor, the Decoy Daddy, with goose season upon us. Use code CWO10 for 10% off all his products as well. He's got awesome silhouette decoys, awesome bags, and the infamous, famous Daddy Hook, which is a game changer in the goose field. So check that out. He was on last week's episode and we kind of announced the new sponsorship. So give him a like, follow, and give us like, follow, subscribe, all that good fun stuff. Now that I've done my rambling, we're going to get into it. I would like to introduce our new badass, well, not new, our badass woman that we have on this week. She just got back from horseback trail guiding in Alberta for her second season, which is phenomenal and super cool, and I can't wait to hear the stories. Please welcome Lola Jung. I got the last name right?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for having me.
Oh, and also Caitlin's with me tonight co-hosting. I totally forgot to introduce her.
That's okay, I'm just here.
Totally. In my rambling, I'm like, oh yeah, it's just blah, blah, blah. Yeah, anyway, Caitlin is also here with me tonight. I don't have much of a voice, so if I kind of lose track, Caitlin's going to take over. But I'm hoping, Lola, you do lots of talking tonight. So
I will. I probably will. I'm also known to ramble, so again, This might be a very long episode.
That's why we've split it into parts. That's totally fine. Totally fine. So where are you from? Where you grew up? How did you kind of get into the horseback riding thing? Is that something you've always been interested in? Or just give us the young Lola.
Yeah, I'll give you the rundown. So I'm 25 years old. I was raised on a family farm.
Yeah, she's very young. She's a baby.
Yeah, I didn't realize you were that young. I was thinking 28, 29.
Oh my goodness. I'm flattered. Yeah.
You go.
So, yeah, 25. Raised on a family farm just outside of Hanover, Ontario. Growing up on the farm, we always had one or two horses around. So that's kind of how I fell into horseback riding. And then I went to the University of Guelph and I studied a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture degree there. And that kind of kickstarted some ideas in my brain of where I wanted to go and places I wanted to see. One of those places being Australia. So we'll get into that in a bit. But I did my education in Ontario and then did my master's degree in animal nutrition and equine exercise physiology. So that kind of kickstarted a lot of kind of the sciencey, nerdy part of me that built a little more confidence around horses. So growing up on our family farm, we had really easygoing horses. And then I worked with research horses, which weren't as easygoing. So that kind of gave me a lot more confidence dealing with equids, basically. Then I guess the way I found this job was my mom in 2016 went and did a backcountry trip. So she went out west to Banff National Park. We rode some horses in the Canadian Rockies. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I need to go do this. And I was like, why would I pay to do it if I could get paid? Clearly, this is someone's job. But I was 16 at the time, of course. So that's how I initially found out about this company called Banff Trail Riders. So I kind of put that dream on the back burner for a bit. As I mentioned, went to school. And then, as we all know, COVID hit. So I was like, cool, now I have a master's degree in horse science and I kind of want to go to Australia, but that seems like a really big jump. So I was like, why don't I move out west first? I was like, it's going to be way easier to move across the country and then across the world. So I was like, oh yeah, that cool job, like that, Mom Wen did that. I was like, yes. So so after I finished my master's degree, I was like, I'm gonna take the jump, and I applied and was lucky enough to get hired. They have a lot of applicants each year to work out there. So I kind of credit building a really good resume to helping me kind of get out there. So yeah, that's how I stumbled upon Banff Trail Riders, which is the company that I worked for the last 2 years. It's the largest, they boast that they're the largest trail outfitter in Canada. So that's pretty cool. And it's right in the town of Banff. So a lot of folks that go to Banff, they go to work there because of like the stunning scenery and everything. And it's kind of known as a party town, and a lot of international workers are there. But I really went for this job. So that's kind of how I stumbled upon and made my way out west. So.
And when you applied for that job, you had to send videos and stuff, didn't you? And like it was a pretty extensive application.
Yeah, fairly extensive. You needed to kind of prove that you could ride a horse, and they require 5 years riding experience. And I did talk to you, Caitlin, at the time, I think, and kind of like just to get, boost myself a little bit, like a little more confidence, like, yeah, I can do this. And so when I found out I got the job, Caitlin was a huge part in helping me kind of prepare for it, because again, I was a rider, but I wasn't, I wasn't like I didn't know what I was getting into. So yeah, I took a lot of riding lessons before leaving.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, Caitlin had a hand in kind of preparing me. She got me jumping in a Western saddle. She's like, well, what if you come across a log out there and have to, jump it in a Western saddle? I'd never done that before. So I just like to highlight that even though I had horse handling experience, like I wasn't the most confident going into it. And now after 2 years, like I can't believe the amount of stuff I've learned and how much more comfortable I am working with horses. So yeah.
So this is going to sound like a really silly question because I know nothing about horses. Is there really a big difference between jumping in an English saddle and jumping in a Western saddle? I thought a saddle is a saddle is a saddle.
You have to be very careful. Let's just say that.
Like,
Injuries could happen if you're not careful.
I know nothing about this kind of stuff. So
that's okay. Yeah. And I assume I kind of listened to some of your other podcasts. I assume some of your listeners might not as well, because this is again kind of some of your previous guests have been a little more hunting focused. So I'm sure we'll get talking more into the wildlife and the bear stories, because that might be a little more entertaining to
well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is because I do want to branch out from hunting and fishing, and it's like you are an outdoors woman, and it's so cool what you do. Like, I mean, I would love to do something like that as an adventure. Like, I would pay somebody to guide me. I would not do the guiding thing. I'm still terrified of horses on a little bit of a scale, but
you survived a trail ride yesterday.
I'm getting better.
You survived.
That was a little baby one though. I'm getting better, but
you gotta work towards your goals, right? Like small steps. So so I'll just give kind of a rundown. I started in May 2023, and I was hired as what they call a front country guide. So front country work is kind of like in town doing 1, 2, 3, and like 4-hour trail rides. And so that's a lot of like the majority of my coworkers are working front country. And then we have a really small backcountry team. So backcountry is like super elusive and kind of held on a pedestal because not many people get to make it out there their first season. And I was very, very fortunate to, I guess within the first month, my managers saw something in me that I didn't really see in myself at the time, but they invited me to become a backcountry guide. So that's how I kind of made my way. So I started last summer. I did our 2 and our 3 day backcountry trips. So again, Banff Trail Riders is Canada's largest trail outfitter. They do anywhere from 1 hour rides to 6-day rides. So I was kind of in charge of our 2 and 3 day, and I really learned the ropes kind of a little bit on more of a smaller scale. Obviously, it's a huge learning curve. I'd never worked with a mule before. This trail outfit uses mules, which is a super environmentally friendly way of transporting goods into your backcountry lodges and camps. And yeah, never worked with mules before. I never even did any farrier work. All of these horses have shoes on, so you're bound to lose horseshoes on the trail. So those were kind of the first big skills that I had to learn, like hands-on skills. And then I had to learn a lot more.
Let me just interject here.
Yeah.
Just explain to anyone who's non-horsey, when you mean having a mule with you, what does that entail that is different than just going on a regular trail ride? Elaborate just what that means so that someone can understand, how that's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, so normal trail horses is any regular trail horse. If you can picture a horse in your head, that's what we're riding, us guests and us guides. A mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey. So the mom's a horse, the dad's a donkey. You put the two of them together and you get this species called a mule. They're sterile and they're very, very strong. So because you cross a horse and a donkey, you get this really strong, stubborn animal. And so you can pack super stubborn. So people think they're quite similar to horses, and they are a little bit, but you have to handle them differently. So as a horse person, you have to kind of take a different approach to mules. I always would joke that a horse will eventually forget, but a mule will always remember and be kind of passive aggressive. So your training has to be a bit different. So they're super strong. They can carry 40% of their own body weight versus a regular horse can only carry 15 to 20% of their body weight. So that means that we can pack all of our groceries, all of our duffel bags. We pack out propane. We put 2 80-liter propane tanks on the back of a mule, and we call it a rocket donkey because it looks like a little jetpack. So that's why we use mules, which is, again, kind of different than other, I've heard other outfits, they use pack horses. So they'll put gear and supplies on a horse. A lot of hunting camps in like the Yukon and like Alaska, they will use pack horses instead of mules. But mules are kind of the old-fashioned way of doing it, and mules are super smart. So you can tie 10 of them together as like a little supply train. And if you have a nice wide trail, you can use them to, trek all your supplies into your camps. So that's what we do. And so I've never worked with mules before coming to Banff Trail Riders. So that's, I hope that kind of encompasses kind of.
I didn't even know there was I didn't know there was a difference between a donkey and a mule. I learned something right now. I thought a donkey and a mule were like synonymous together.
And when you were riding, you'd be in charge, someone would be in charge of leading a mule as well, right? Like you would have to ride a horse and then control one of the mules sometimes too, right?
Yeah, so I did send some pictures along. I don't know if you can manage to post them in the show notes. And it's a clear picture of how I would lead a mule. So in this outfit, we would have a team of what we would call packers. So they would take 10 mules and they would really just run supply trains. They would just, be grabbing our bags, moving them from camp to camp. Myself as a guide, I took like the scenic routes with the guests. And I only had one mule with me. So I only had to lead, the mule has a string attached to his head, and I hold on to that string and I basically drag him along behind me and take him with me for the day. And so that mule is what we like to call our lunch mule. So he isn't lunch, he's carrying lunch, is always a fun joke for guests. And so the lunch mule I had this season, his name is Itchy. So if I talk about Itchy in the next like hour, I'm talking about the little mule that would carry my first aid supplies, backup gear, rain gear, anything for lunch, my kettle, my coffee, firewood, all of that was on my lunch mule. So he was with me anytime I was on the trail.
So, like, you had one specific mule you worked with then? Did you have like a specific horse that you always took out? Like, do you guys have like specific horses for yourselves out there? Like, you kind of claim them as your own for the season?
Yeah. Yeah, I was very lucky to because I was a backcountry guide. I kind of had first dibs. So yeah, I had one horse. His name is Miles, and I rode him both summers. And I could have taken on other horses, but the thing is, in the backcountry, there's so many random variables and any small to large problems. And I knew how Miles would react in most situations. Like we really built, he was like my coworker, right? I ride him for almost 5 hours a day, 6 days straight. So I kind of knew how he would react in most circumstances, and that kind of safety net is hard to find. And horses are kind of like any other pet. You have to have a connection, and we kind of just clicked. And so yeah, I rode Miles for 2 years, and that is the big bay horse, the big brown with like black mane and tail. That is in the pictures as well.
So like you go up earlier, obviously, to get a feel of all the trails and everything like that. Like, do you ride them all before guests start coming up and you see where you're going and stuff?
Yeah, so the trails are fairly straightforward, to be honest. We call it backcountry, but I kind of joke that if you were terrible with directions, you might get lost. But where we travel, where our outfit travels currently, because historically this outfit used to travel to a lot more valleys, a lot more different mountain ranges and stuff. But as of right now, we travel down the Sundance Valley. So we just head south of the town, and our first lodge sits at the north base of the valley. And then our furthest lodge sits at the very south end of the valley. So you're just following kind of a mountain range, you're following a steady creek. And yes, the trails get pretty, I don't know, narrow and really rugged terrain, but you can kind of always gauge where you are. Kind of forgetting what the original question was. No.
If you take time to like ride and learn the trails before the guests come.
Yeah, so I mean, the first time I got trained on backcountry, I went with a very experienced guide, and she showed me the ropes for 5 days, and then it was like, okay, you're on your own next week. So really learning on the fly, which is good because it's kind of sink or swim. I always speak very highly of our manager, Erica, who manages the entire backcountry team. So that means she manages us guides, she manages the packers, and then the lodges also have cooks. So she manages all of that. And, she was a really good manager and just kind of believing in you, but also like sink or swim, like pull your weight. And you have to be able to learn quickly. So that was, again, part of the huge learning curve of last season. And then this summer, I came in pretty confidently. I had to do a lot more trails, but again, I went out with management, with other guides, like once in the trails. And then, the next week you're hitting them with the guests. So you just have to be confident in your skills and abilities. Yeah.
So what are some, because, after 5 days of training, what are some safety protocols that they put in place for you guys? Do you guys have like satellite phones or walkies, or how do you communicate? What is your protocol in case of like someone getting hurt or something like that?
Yeah, so up at the lodges, there are radios, like steady radios, and we do a very diligent 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. check-in. So town will radio the first lodge, and you're like, okay, is everyone in camp? Yep, everyone's in camp, all good for the night, no messages. So there is a very good communication system that way. The lodges also carried bear bangers and bear spray. On myself, on the trail, I carried a Garmin InReach. So satellite phones don't really work out there, from my understanding. The valleys are just too deep. The mountain's kind of too high. So we carry a Garmin InReach, which is kind of like a little messaging device. Super annoying to message on. It's like an old-fashioned BlackBerry. You got to hit A, toggle over, got to hit E. So we use it for communication, kind of in, I'm not using it often on the trail. But if there's a giant tree down that I can't cut with the saw that is on my saddle, I'll probably shoot a message to one of my other team members, because the packers then can grab a chainsaw from one of the lodges, head down the trail and cut it up for me. But on the Garmin InReach, there is an SOS feature. And I've been told, I've never, touch wood, I've never had to use the SOS feature. But I've been told that a helicopter can come to my location within like 7 to 10 minutes from the town of Banff or Canmore, which is, again, a very good feeling as a guide and what we're getting into. I also carry a very extensive first aid kit in my pack boxes. So on the mule, on Itchy, there's a very big first aid kit. And then also in my saddle bags on my own personal horse, there's first aid kit and bear spray. So those are kind of some of the safety features. In
And
terms of
do you guys get first aid training on the job? Do they give you that?
So they do not. They do require that you have first aid training when you apply. So I went ahead and got my kind of like more advanced level of CPR first aid training for the application process. That being said, I never, I think they could have done a better job at preparing me in terms of, I don't know, first aid or like, you don't know what you don't know until it happens is kind of what happened. So, I had one of my first incidences, and people come off, we're riding 1,200-pound animals in a national park. Something's bound to happen, regardless of how safe and how diligent you can be as a guide. And I had some other guests on that trip sit me down very respectfully, and they were emergency personnel. And they sat me down and they're like, hey, we get it. You're young, you're new to this, but maybe you should, ask her if she's on blood thinners. Is she going to have a brain aneurysm tonight, kind of thing. They then pointed out, well, what if she had broken something on the trail? Where's your helicopter evac? Like, can they get in on the trail there? And it kind of kick-started this like, okay, I'm going to start playing like this mental game, because you're in the saddle, just daydreaming for hours on end on the trail. And I made it a point to know exactly where I should be on the trail within like a 5 to 10 minute window. So I knew if I was leaving my lunch site at 2:30, I should be at the lodge at 4:45, depending on like how fast the horses are. Obviously, if it's a very hot day, the horses are moving slower. You factor in a lot of things. But I made it a point to play a game in my head. Okay, if someone were to break a wrist, how would I get them on the horse? If they were to break just roll their ankle, they can't put their foot in the stirrup, which is like the side piece of the saddle. So a lot of people might, criticize me and be like, oh, that's kind of paranoia. But I just thought it would make me a better guide, because when, stuff happens, then you've kind of already thought about it, because there's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. At the end of the day, my job is to get these guests safely from point A to point B, and also make sure they're having a little bit of fun on the side, which we do have a lot of fun.
So do you guys like actually camp, or you mentioned lodges? Do you just do the trail to like the lodge and then another trail, or like do you guys actually like set up tents and camp and stuff?
So they used to, which was super rugged, and I'm sure it was super cold, because this is Banff National Park and you're at a very high elevation. But I've heard some really wild, cool stories from that time. Nowadays, they just run what we call lodge side. So we have 2 lodges that we ride to. Again, they used to have a lot more lodges that they rode to, but obviously you can imagine in this day and age, there's a lot more red tape around provincial park boundaries, and there's conflict between, mountain bikers and horseback riders. So where we ride is kind of strictly trails. They are public. But I barely see anyone out there other than our company. So yeah, we do ride to lodges. The first lodge is super nice. It's kind of is quite luxurious, solar panels and runs on propane. And then the second lodge, the furthest lodge, it sits at about 6,000 feet elevation, and it's a lot more camping. I'm using an outhouse all summer long. I do have the chance to shower, but the guests get priorities on the shower. So I'm going, 6 days without showering sometimes, which is fine because, yeah, it's part of it.
Yeah, wow. That's 6,000 elevation. That's high. I'm assuming,
you were mentioning about some of the trails that you were on were quite. Some of them are rough and more challenging. What's the roughest trails? Describe some of the rougher trails just so that people can get a visual of what some of the trails would look like. Not thinking, because in my head, I think the trails that we have around here are simply a nice leisurely walk through the bush. But I imagine the ones that you guys ride on there are a little bit different.
Yeah. So they kind of, if you do a 2-day trip, you're just riding on a wider, windy trail. It's the Rocky Mountains, so it can be kind of rocky, but you're still at a lower elevation. If you do the 6-day trip, which is what I guided this summer, so that's our biggest, the biggest you can go with this company, and the farthest you go, and the craziest terrain you can do. So on the 6-day trip, we do what we call Allenby Pass. So you can Google it. It's a stunning pass right through, in the middle of the Rockies. And we'd leave camp, and it would take us 2.5 hours to get up to the top of the pass. And it would take us 2.5 hours because we would stop at every switchback for the horses to catch their breath, because we rise to 8,500 feet in elevation. Yeah.
So you're literally riding side of a mountain.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. We are literally riding up the side of a mountain, which has its, again, pros and cons. It's a huge, that was always my most stressful day, safety wise. But I cannot put into words the view and the scenery and just the awe-inspiringness of it. For any horseback rider, as we all are horse crazy, we just love enjoying, being on the back of a horse, and to do it with your friends, because most of these guests come in groups, or they come with their best friend or their daughter. And we would joke that our furthest lodge is called Halfway. The name's kind of a misnomer, but and we would joke, our cooks would welcome guests and say, "Welcome to halfway to heaven." And when you're up on Allenby Pass, when you're at 8,000 feet elevation, and the middle of the summer, so we're getting some good weather. Yeah, it's the view is so phenomenal. You just get goosebumps. And that was the coolest part about being a guide, was getting to show people these unbelievable, places on the back of a horse. How awesome that was my job. And yeah, I don't remember what the original question was. I just keep going on and on and on.
That's the podcast.
Yeah, you just talk and talk. So do you have a lot of riders that have no idea what the hell they're doing, and then you have to kind of really, really teach them? That would be me. I do this and I'd be like, I don't know what I'm doing. How do you make the horse go?
After 6 days, you would know how to ride. Then 12 hours a day, you'd be fine.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
do you ever get frustrated with people if they don't know how to ride or if they're not listening to you? And like, does that happen very often?
I'm just gonna jot down so I can remember my yeah. So we do promote the 6-day trip as beginner friendly. To be fair, I didn't have many beginners. And of the beginner riders, they have typically sat on a horse at least, a handful, like at least 3 times in their life, hopefully. That being said, I kind of joked. I had a 65-year-old man that never touched a horse before come on a 3-day trip, and he did amazing because he was open-minded.
His legs I don't know how he would have walked after. His legs would have been so sore.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I'm like, as long as you're open to being uncomfortable because you are kind of out of your element, and as long as you're open-minded and ready for adventure, those were the 2 hallmarks. I don't care what level, because I had amazing riders that would come out on these trips, but it was frustrating because I always felt the first 2 days of the 6-day trip, I would get a lot of like ageism thrown at me. A lot of the ladies would, again, if you are a horseback rider, kind of the stereotypical crazy horse lady that, the moment she's on one of our horses, she's telling you about, oh, my mare at home does this and my gelding at home does this as well. And you just got to put it behind you, because by day 3, I usually found we kind of broke the ice. And I didn't have to prove myself. They knew at that point, like, oh, she might be a young woman, but she knows what she's doing. And oh, she's actually a really hard worker. Like that was kind of the biggest frustration was being told in the first 2 days of knowing me, like, oh, I've been riding horses longer than you've been alive. And I'm like, great, but I'm your guide. So you're going to listen to me and how I do it, because there's a reason I'm saying these things. That was that.
If it's so easy, why are you paying me to do this? Like,
yeah. So that was kind of like the biggest frustration, I guess. So I'd much rather have a very beginner rider that is open-minded and willing to listen to my instructions. And Caitlin, you just joked, like, I don't know how they would have done it. Like, their bodies must have been so sore. And that was always a comment. Day 1, guests would be a little bit miserable. You'd look back and you're like, 20 more minutes, guys. But I always say day 1, you're going from 0 to 100. Like, you are suddenly going from not riding often to sitting 5 hours in a saddle in one day.
We went for an hour yesterday and Nicole got off. She's like, I can't feel my butt. And I'm like, yeah. So, like, could you imagine, like, 5 times that?
No, I woke up this morning, I was like, why are my legs and butt sore? Like, oh, God, oh, wait, I rode a horse yesterday. Like, and this is what you guys do, like, daily, like.
All day.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Well, when you do it all day, you're not as sore. Mind you, this is kind of maybe TMI and kind of nasty, but I did have some mad saddle sores, like, in the middle of the summer. That is a real thing because, again, you're sitting in a saddle for at least 5 hours a day. 5-6 days a week. But I wouldn't trade it for the world, because there are so many moments when you're just sitting in the saddle and you walk out to this amazing, creek with mountains and a beautiful sunrise, and you're like, I'm getting paid to do this.
Yeah. Can you not get a saddle that's like fluffy and like comfy on your butt? Like,
yeah, you probably can, but I mean, I don't know about our listeners, but I don't have the budget for that. So
yeah, so they are expensive.
Oh yes.
Plus, our saddles are kind of fit to the horse you're riding, right? So it was like the saddle's assigned to the horse because it needs to fit the horse. So you're kind of stuck with whatever really, really old company saddle you're sitting in, which is great because I'm all for. The coolest part about my job was I could put horse comfort above guest comfort. Mm-hmm. Like, the horses were my responsibility for 6 days. And often, again, as I mentioned, I'm well educated. So I told myself that morally I wouldn't work for a company that used animals in tourism if I didn't think that their health and well-being was put first. And that was amazing about Banff Trail Riders. Like, they really allowed me to be as diligent and caring as I could be for these amazing horses. I can't speak like highly enough of these animals that work so hard for us, and they did their job so well. And like, they're worth their weight in gold, like 20 times over. So it was so cool to work with animals in that environment and also provide the best care I could. So yeah, so they all had their own saddles, and if the guest was a little uncomfortable, yeah, I'd try and make it work, but at the end of the day, the horse is my priority. So
did you ever have to like substitute out a horse? Like, if you were to make that call on the trail and say this horse just isn't doing great or whatever, how do you handle that when you're on the trail?
yeah, so a couple options. We have extra horses at camp. They are the cook's horses, so the cooks obviously have to ride up to camp. So those cook's horses were typically like well-rounded, could fit the average human. So those were kind of our backup. So if I was in camp or close to camp, I could swap out a cook's horse. The guest horse that maybe isn't feeling well or is sore or not able to do his job, he would then get escorted back to town as quickly as we could. In terms of on the trail, I've had horses, lose shoes in the middle of the trail. It happens quite often going over very rocky terrain. I would carry my shoeing gear with me on the mule, so that way I could pull the shoe off. For those unfamiliar with horseshoes, they are attached with nails. And sometimes if a shoe is half off or coming loose, it's better to just pull it off than let it kind of crack the hoof or cause more damage. So there was a couple times where I maybe they lost a shoe. I would see how the horse would go, and in one case I put the guest on my horse, my guide horse Miles, and I walked the 2 hours, I don't know, like 7-8 kilometers with the lame horse, with the horse that was limping, walked him to camp. So that's what you do as a guide. That's our protocol, and especially because we are guest facing, I would never want my guests to see me push an animal that's hurting. I would much rather walk myself,
And I think that's like really important. Anyone who knows tourism and horses, typically there are a lot of countries that unfortunately the horses are not well taken care of in a lot of these tourism type situations, and especially when you go to like resort countries and stuff like that, there's a lot of horses that are pretty malnourished and not taken care of. So it's good that they value their animals.
Yeah.
How many horses?
And we do actually. So we have about I think 270 dude horses. So yeah.
Wow.
So you're just freezing just a little bit. Yeah. So 270 horses that guests can ride. They're all kinds of shapes and sizes. We have them kind of sorted to carry certain weight classes. So every single person, whether you're doing a 1-hour ride or a 6-day trip, you get weighed the day of, because we need to know that the horse can carry your body weight. We also take height for those backcountry trips, because people with long legs, or can get on a taller horse. And then we get their riding ability for those 6-day trips as well. So I have a couple, I would joke, my insurance policy horses, really, really good horses that know their job so well. So the oldest gentleman I took out this summer was 82 years old on a 6-day trip.
He did 6-day.
Yeah. He was this old farmer, actually from Ottawa, Ontario. Shout out to Leo, because he, was, we put him on Otis, a horse that is like would just babysit this old man. Like this old man didn't have to do much. He just could enjoy his time, and I didn't have to worry too much as well. We have a couple horses that are newer to the herd, so they're still learning the ropes, and we'll put an advanced rider on them. Great, that advanced rider knows how to kind of correct them or keep them walking, and they're not off in the grass having a snack when they should be working. So that's kind of fun. Wide variety of horses, all different shapes and sizes and attitudes to work with. So.
Hey guys, so that was part 1 of our conversation with Lola about all her adventures out west. Tune in next week to hear more stories about her adventures and her encounter with a big old grizzly bear. It's definitely worth a listen. Thanks, guys.